I wanted to start here in Matthew chapter 7, just starting in verse 1. Do not judge so that you may not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged, and the measure you give will be the measure you get. Why do you see the speck in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, while the log is still in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. I wanted to read that because I realize that probably all of us have, or for sure myself, have something in my life that would be some form of hypocrisy, although that's not what I desire. I desire to have all forms of hypocrisy removed from my life, but as I was looking through the different verses that talk about hypocrisy, it's pretty clear to see that the people that have it can't see it in themselves as clearly as the people that are around them, and maybe like pride or anything like that. So I just wanted to start with that. I had some verses. I wanted to read here, talk some verses here about hypocrisy. Maybe we turn to Matthew 23:28. Jesus is talking to the to the scribes and Pharisees here, and he's pointing out hypocrisy in their lives, different ways, and so I'll just read 28. Maybe I'll just start in 27. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside look beautiful, but inside they are full of bones of the dead and of all kinds of filth. So you also on the outside look righteous to others, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. We see there that hypocrisy is something that is something very serious in God's eyes, and it can be covered over and look good from the outside, but inside it can be very bad. Jesus seemed to have a strong hate against this hypocrisy that he saw in the religious people of his time, and so I think it's something that we should also take important, or it should be important to us to not be that way. Here in Luke 12, it talks about hypocrisy being like 11, like the Pharisees had 11. So I believe it can be something that kind of spreads around, that more than the person that's maybe being a hypocrite in the first place, it can spread to other people as well. Just a warning for us, I guess, to be careful what we're being leavened by, or who we're being leavened to, I guess. Or in Romans 12:9, Paul talks about a love that we should have a love without hypocrisy. And I was just thinking about that, what he meant by that. Let me see if I get to that. Here it says, "Let love be genuine," in a different version. I thought that it's easy to. I think it could go different ways, but maybe in one way we could be hypocritical in our love, or in our show of love towards other people, would be that it would be some advantage to us to be kind or gracious to people because of some advantage that we could see that would come our way from that. I'll just read a few verses there, starting in 9. "Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not lag in zeal. Be ardent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in suffering. Persevere in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Extend hospitality to strangers." Kind of off subject there, but just a lot of good little few verses of instructions for us. I guess I could read the 14 there too. "Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Do not claim to be wiser than you are. Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. If it is possible, so far as to depend on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourself, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay,' says the Lord. No, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. For by doing this you will heap burning coals on their heads. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." Just some real good Christian instruction there for us to live. I really like that. I hadn't read that that far when I was looking at verses about hypocrisy, but I think lying. I had a verse written down here in 1 Timothy 4:2. I guess we could go there and read that. It talks about deceit. Hypocrisy is very closely or the same thing as lying or being deceitful, and I just see all the warnings in the Bible against deceit, and talks in a few places. It talks about see if I can find that. Talks about deceit not entering heaven. At the end of Revelations, it talks about the different kinds of people that would be outside of the New Jerusalem, and one of them was all those that love and practice falsehood or lies, and so hypocrisy is something that'll separate us from God, because the devil is the father of lies, and God is truth, and there's no falsehood in him. Anyways, I'll read here 1 Timothy 4, chapter 4, verse 2. Talking about deceitful spirits. I'll just start in 4. Now the Spirit expressly says that in the later times some will renounce the faith by paying attention to deceitful spirits and teachings of demons, through the hypocrisy of liars whose consciences are seared with a hot iron. They forbid marriage and demand abstinence from food, which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. Anyways, I just wanted to connect that. There it connects kind of the hypocrisy and the lying part, and that's about all I had. If anyone has anything to add to it or correct, feel free.
Yeah, I'm thankful for those verses that were read, and I think a pretty common definition of hypocrisy or is something along the lines from someone who professes one thing but practices another, or is one thing outwardly and something else inwardly, and you can just see how and why God would be so displeased with that. You just imagine as he's looking for fruit and looking for good fruit, if he finds fruit that just looks all nice and polished and on the outside there's no defects, and then you put a knife to it and reveal the inside and it's just rotten. Way more disappointing than if you'd pick up an apple and you saw a blemish here and there, But after spending a little time, maybe it has some mold on the outside. If you take a little time and you cut that blemish out and wash that mold off and cut it open, there's still a very good edible portion on the inside. A thought I had about loving without loving people without hypocrisy is like, God really knows like how we feel about people. So we can be very kind to someone's face, be very, very charitable. It would go along the lines of what Harvey was saying. Like if we think it's an advantage to us, we can be very kind. And once we talk to other people about this person and think that he'll never find out what we say, is often revealed how we actually feel about the person. And so these are things that we can apply to our life. We could sit down and talk maybe much about people, or like we look at what Jesus, some of the things Jesus plainly spoke to as hypocrisy, the religious groups and Pharisees and scribes who just did these absurd things, and yet profess themselves to be the right ones. We can maybe think that we can look around and see that in churches or groups, but let's just look into our own hearts. After all, judgment begins at the house of God. If we are God's children, then here's where it starts. That's all I have to share right now about it.
Bless you, Harvey. You did a very exhaustive study, I thought. I think Romans 12, verse 9, when it does say, let love be without can't say it, dissimulation, how do you say it? Hypocrisy, other versions, and that could be talking about the litany, the string of all the other things. I appreciate your comments too, Brother Dwayne. Basically, I'll confess the sin. I guess you brothers maybe open up more for discussion if it's a sin. Working at Mazzio's, last week, people come into the dine-in, and it was a man. He was 6 feet tall, but he is a transgender. He dresses up as a woman, and one of the young man, 18, comes over to me, Rob, and he said, those two guys sitting at the table, those two people sitting at the table, one of them's a guy. I says, yeah, I know. He comes in all the time. And I said, yeah, it's disgusting, and God didn't make him like that way. And I feel that is throwing a shot, a dig. I should go over. I pray for the man privately, but not only should my testimony be better at work, but I should go over to the man sitting down and just look, when I don't have a delivery, and just look him in the eye and say, everything going okay? And you're doing okay? And get to know them, like when they have the gay pride marches, rather than just hold up the signs, you're going to hell and it's an abomination. Have a compassion for them, to at least some type of dialogue that would say that, in the church at Corinth, such were some of you, and so, to have a more loving conversation with them. Not to say that this is right by any means, but to say that, come on, you weren't born like that, and don't you really think that God wants you to be what He made you? God made you this way. Don't strive with your Creator. I'm just confessing that I shouldn't just go along with the flow, just gay bashing and just Chick-fil-A. What was it, Chick-fil-A? Remember? No, we're not going to honor the homosexuals, and their sales went through the roof, and yeah, I like that attitude in a sense, but more compassion. They're just as sinners as I was a fornicator. I fornicated sometimes, and people who are liars or whatever. I mean, I should have more compassion on any type of sin and not just be, well, that's one I just, that's too gross. And so I pray for me that I will be a better witness. And when he comes again, I will talk to him. And I'll talk. If I get fired, I mean, I'm not, I just at least to know, let him know that I pray for him and I love him. And I've had conversations with lesbians before. We were down in Del Rio, and some of them actually Roxanne enjoyed talking with me about it. The other one didn't, but one of them did. And she said she even wanted to talk the Bible about it. But the Lord be magnified.
I had also been thinking about that, like whether or not we actually care for one another, or whether our words mean anything, or when we interact with one another, if it's actually genuine interaction, or if it's just you're sort of going through the motion, or like I feel like sometimes maybe we might have those days, or maybe we feel like we don't have enough time for somebody else, or let them, give them the time of day or something like that. But I think in those moments, like sometimes I have to go back and look and like whether or not I was just simply saying something for the sake of saying something, or if I was actually saying something that held value, or like the words that you speak actually mean something to you or not. I don't know, maybe something to focus on. But
I don't know if I can share what I was thinking with the clarity that I'd like to, maybe partly because I don't think I entirely understand it either, but you talked about the I think you read about the removing the speck, and first removing the beam, and you also read judge not lest ye be judged, and with what measure. I don't understand this all, but somehow, I don't know if you read this one, but Paul talks about restoring someone and taking heed to yourself lest you also be tempted or something. You know what I'm talking about? Maybe somebody could quote it better. But somehow, there's things that are wrong, and we have to be able to recognize those things and to shun them in our life, and even be able to help other people see them. But I've just experienced in my life that whenever we are just really judging someone, I guess, like at being judging, I don't know what even the right words are, but somehow we are in a very vulnerable place, I think. It's a place that is very easy for us to fall. I don't know if that makes enough sense, but it's just, I feel like I've seen it as well as experienced it myself.
I'm just thankful for what's been shared, and I was just thinking about the idea of being merciful to sinners, and then of the people we meet that are doing very wrong. And then I thought, well, Jesus came and he preached to sinners. all of us, all of them were sinners. But the difference was those that were playing the hypocrite just simply hated Jesus to the point of going ahead and taking his life. The other sinners that were smitten, and they recognized that Christ was the way to life and had the truth. They were glad. They were glad for Jesus, and I would have to think today would be the same. There's people that should be hating us to the point of wanting to kill us. And there should be people really appreciating the message we put out that Jesus is the King, and he has the life, the way to eternal life, and he has life itself in his hands. It seems like this should be the same today. So to have that discernment or just have that heart like Jesus had to tell the truth, in just its simplicity, I think is all he did. It was not very complicated, and so yeah, I appreciated the thoughts on hypocrisy and the idea that when Norman talked about when you're saying about criticizing somebody or I forget what word you used, but judging or like yeah, I just really agree with that. For some reason, it seems like when we choose to do right or we make the right choices, it just seems like we get under a more serious attacks. Things come up that normally don't come up somehow. I'm not sure if that's the vulnerability you had in mind, but that's what I thought of when. And of course, if we have pride in our lives, then we are in great danger of judgment ourselves. But anyways, I appreciated it all.
Yeah, I think you clarified what I was about to ask you about it. Like, if I understood what you were saying, you weren't just implying that, like, if we judge wrongfully about something that we're in a vulnerable position, but also, like, somehow we if we're like, well, just like you explained, like if we are making decisions or judgments or that are also helping someone out of a bad situation, it also puts us in a vulnerable position. Is that? Yeah. And I do think I've seen that too. I've seen. I have this memorable experience of something that happened. Like, seems like sometimes after either a great victory or just a really, like, the accomplishment of a really difficult task, that somehow we're just in a really vulnerable position to fall. Consider, here's an example. Elijah. One day he does this thing that is just unbelievably victorious. And he makes a deal with the worshippers of Baal that whoever they'll build altars, they'll call on their gods, whoever's God sends fire from heaven, that's the true God, and you know the story. But like after you would think like, man, that was just. I mean, he did it. He showed without a doubt who the real God was. Nobody should have to question whether this God is real, whether he's powerful, whether he is it. But the next day, the very next day, Elijah sat under that juniper tree and was discouraged, depressed, thinking, afraid that this woman called Jezebel is going to kill him, and he's the only one left. And I'm not saying that Elijah was in sin in doing these things, but it does seem like how could he go from such a great victory one day to such a low position the next day? But I'd have some experiences in my life too, similar, not nearly to that extent, but like, especially this one thing happened in northern Missouri. I had a neighbor who was I'd just call him like a very zealous Baptist maybe, or something like that. And he wanted to call us brothers, and he did come to our meetings a few times, Charles Quinn, and just real zealous about talking about the blood of Christ. But he was divorced and remarried at least, I think, 3 times. And I knew that at one point or another, like, I'd just have to lay this all out for him. And one evening he came because he wanted to talk about something else. Like, he was closely enough with us. He'd been to a meeting or two, and there was another family who had kind of kept him at an arm's length, and he was troubled about that, and he wanted to come talk to me about it, why. And he came one evening, drove in the driveway, had his Bible in his hand, came up and, wanted to ask that there was a problem. There's a man that's wanting to, that has some issues with him, and he wants to know why. And he kind of started by saying, like, I know that there's nothing in my life that keeps me from being a brother. And though this particular issue of his adulterous situation was not what this other person was concerned about getting too close to him, but I thought, okay, well, this is the opportunity. He's saying there is nothing in his life that would keep him from being a brother. It's important for me to just point this out. And so we just made it. I think Norman was there at my house when he came, maybe, but we just laid it out for him that, look, this marriage that you're in is adultery. We explained to him why, and why we could not call you a brother because of this, he had a very typical evangelical idea of what it means to be born again and saved. And so, because he was saved in his mind, he was disappointed that in spite of our different beliefs about divorce and remarriage, that we still couldn't fellowship together around the blood of Christ. But it was one of those things, like, it was something that had to be done. It was difficult to look neighbor in the eye, a person who you've had interactions with. He bought some things from me. I worked for him some, all this and that. Just, and he took it seriously, as far as, like, not maybe in a repentive way, but, like, he recognized that this is a dividing line for us. But that ended with me, like, maybe feeling like a very important thing has been accomplished, a very important thing has been made known, a victory, if you'd call it that, a victory at least in the sense that this thing that had to be done got done. And just within I don't know, a very short time. I can't remember if it was days, but for sure within the week or two, a couple of his cattle got out, and they came up my road. I knew they were his, and I would have preferred to just chase him back into his pasture, without even calling him, and just put him back where they belong. And I wasn't that anxious to get into another debate with him, I guess. And but I had to leave that day, and so I may not have all this detail right. It seems to me like maybe I let him into my pasture or something, and I had to leave for the day or for the greater part of the day. Thought I'd just put him back in the evening. Anyway, maybe I was away longer than I thought. It was either a really rainy or snowy day, and anyway, by the time I came back, I couldn't find him anymore, and I felt real bad about all this, and I just know that it's an obligation it's just a very simple obligation that we should have, that if we see a man's livestock going astray, that we know who it belongs to, we should at least notify the person. And I failed to do that, and but I looked high and low for those cattle and couldn't find them that afternoon, and so I called him to tell him, and I just told him the whole story, like that I'd seen him in the morning, and now I was looking to put him back and couldn't find him. And I did tell him, like, if he finds him and wherever he finds him and needs help to get him in, I'll be glad to come help him. But he was very offended. I mean, he told me later, something like, he took it. Well, he said later something like, if I see somebody's cows out, I don't care if I don't know the person, or I don't care if I'm pretty sure the person's going to hell, I'd let him know. And I just feel like I failed on this thing that was really small compared to the big thing that I had to expose to him. It's just a reminder, like, there's no accomplishment, no victory, no great thing that we can do that doesn't still leave us very dependent on the grace of God and His guidance and help, and to be humble. And so, yeah, I just had to think of those things.
Appreciate that story, Brother Dwayne. My mind is racing all these things, tying in with Norman's lesson. Well, he has words of eternal life. So let's just imagine in our mind's eye the rich young ruler, after he refused to come to Jesus. So he went home to his family and said, he preaches a lot of good things, but giving up this money, giving up all my money and following, it's just so hard to take. Something like the man who's living in divorce or living in adultery. And then the other one, Norman, about like pride before destruction, kind of a killjoy. For one time, maybe many of you have heard this before, but for one time when Peter was, Peter said, "Hey, Lord, I'm a sinful man, get away from me." And of course, Peter had so many sin, denying the Lord and playing the hypocrite, Galatians 6, or Galatians 2, among the Jews. But when he said to his disciples, "Well, who do you say I am?" Well, some say Jeremiah, Elias, one of the prophets. But who do you say? And Peter said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And he said, "Blessed art thou, Bar Jonah, for men hasn't revealed it to you, but my Father in heaven." And so Peter's gotten a tap in the shoulder, got his brownie points. He's really got a swell head. And then Jesus says, but the Son of Man must suffer many things and be persecuted and crucified. And then Peter says, Lord forbid. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. Talk about a killjoy from being number one, head of the class and being, the bright student. And then 2 minutes later, hey, Satan, get behind me, And so, we got to be careful with that. The Lord be magnified.